The true measure of a leader's time in power is not the number of borders they cross, but the well-being of the people they rule. Today, as we analyze the legacy of the man at the helm of Russia for the past quarter century, the verdict is a devastating one. He received a nation with a vast, unparalleled inheritance and systematically reduced it to a state of impoverishment, isolation, and war. His rule, based on a fraudulent promise of stability and greatness, leaves behind only ruin and shame. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. When he first assumed power in the early 2000s, Russia was handed a generational opportunity unique in modern history. The nation was literally flooded with oil dollars. Global energy prices were soaring, the budget was overflowing, and the country possessed colossal natural resources, the largest reserves of natural gas, vast deposits of oil, metals, and an educated and talented population. The course of action was clear: invest that wealth in diversification, technology, and institution building to create a sustainable modern economy. That was the open door to prosperity. Instead, the leader made a catastrophic choice. He used that unprecedented wealth to construct a brittle, authoritarian, and profoundly corrupt vertical of power. The primary objective of the elite became not national development, but personal enrichment and the iron-fisted maintenance of political control. The nation's wealth was not invested in infrastructure or the future. It was funneled into extravagant personal projects and parked in offshore accounts, creating a deep-seated financial rot. The consequence was a rapid stagnation of living standards. After a brief initial rise in the early 2000s, the real disposable income of the average Russian citizen plateaued and then began a long, steady decline after 2014. The recent years of war have only accelerated this decay into a state of stagflation, economic stagnation combined with crippling inflation. The economy has been brutally repurposed, switching over entirely to a war footing, with the defense sector being bloated while the civilian sectors starve. The majority of citizens are now poorer, their well-being sacrificed to fund the military ambitions of the leader. The institutional decay is just as severe. Instead of building strong democratic institutions, the leaders systematically destroyed them. Independent media was silenced, elections were turned into a farce, and the political opposition was either exiled, imprisoned, or assassinated. The ultimate symbol of this decay is the massive scale of the repression that intensified following the 2022 invasion. Citizens now face harsh prison sentences for the slightest criticism, for posts on social media, for anecdotes, or for merely speaking the truth about the war. This created a culture of fear where legal and political uncertainty suffocates any potential for genuine innovation or economic growth. This mismanagement has led to a profound demographic crisis and an irreversible brain drain. The nation's most active and educated citizens have fled in massive numbers since the start of the war, with estimates of the exodus ranging from 500,000 to over 1 million people. This is a hemorrhaging of the country's most vital human capital. Compounding this, the birth rate has plummeted to near historic lows, rivaling the decline seen only during the darkest years of World War II. The war has taken the lives of young men and pushed the nation into a demographic spiral that will plague its economic future for generations. The final verdict on this economic legacy is that the leader received a golden inheritance and over 2 decades exchanged it for a broken, isolated, and highly volatile dictatorship. He failed to build a normal, functioning economy, choosing instead to rely on the precarious oil needle and the decay.
The true and irreversible tragedy of this long period of leadership is etched not on political manifestos, but on the maps of the front line and in the grim statistics of the casualty count. The leader inherited a military that was promised to be a powerful global force, yet his war has exposed it as a paper tiger, strong only in rhetoric and weak in reality. The failure of this war is not merely a setback, it is a profound historical humiliation that has shattered the illusion of Russian military might across all domains, land, sea, and air. To understand the scale of this military catastrophe, we must look at the leader's initial maximalist goals. The stated objectives were to capture Kyiv, occupy Ukraine west of the Dnipro, seize Odessa, and overthrow the government. Not a single one of these strategic objectives has been achieved. The entire premise of the invasion, that Ukraine would collapse in a matter of days, was fundamentally flawed. This failure to seize a single strategic city since the early months of 2022 proves that the military force the leader commands is incapable of projecting power effectively against a determined, unified resistance. The reality is a military trapped in a catastrophic stalemate, trading human lives for territorial gains that are measured in meters, not miles. This strategic futility is reflected in a human cost that is historically unprecedented. The overwhelming consensus among military analysts is that total Russian casualties, including the killed and the severely wounded, are nearing 1 million personnel. This figure is a devastating indictment of the strategic doctrine employed by the Russian command. To put this loss into perspective, Russia's predecessor, the Soviet Union, withdrew from its entire decade-long war in Afghanistan after losing just 18,000 soldiers. Russia has now paid a human price that is unparalleled since the Second World War. This scale of loss is a consequence of a high command that treats its own soldiers as expendable materiel, a brutal and unsustainable strategic choice that guarantees long-term military decay. The material and tactical failures are just as profound. The core of the original invasion force, the elite airborne and marine brigades, have been effectively destroyed and replaced by a chaotic mix of mobilized personnel and poorly trained recruits. The massive stockpiles of Soviet-era tanks and armored vehicles, once considered inexhaustible, have been systematically consumed by the war, forcing the Russian military to rely on relics pulled directly from storage. This reliance on outdated, poorly protected equipment ensures that the casualty rate will only climb higher. The military's once vaunted quantitative advantage is being rapidly eroded by a devastating, self-destructive feedback loop.
We have meticulously chronicled the economic and military self-destruction of the Russian state. But the scope of the leader's failure extends far beyond his borders. The third devastating conclusion of his rule is the total collapse of Russia's international standing. A geopolitical catastrophe that has seen the nation shed influence, lose critical markets, and ultimately trade its sovereignty for the status of an economic vassal state to China. The narrative of the geopolitical genius is now a ruinous lie. The collapse began in Russia's own backyard, the near abroad, where the leader's aggression shattered trust and destroyed alliances. The war in Ukraine exposed the security guarantees of the Russian state as worthless, leading to an immediate and profound loss of influence across Central Asia and the Caucasus. The most visible failure is the loss of Armenia, Russia's most loyal military partner in the region. After Moscow failed to intervene decisively in the conflict over Karabakh, Armenia publicly turned its back on the CSTO, sought military aid from India, and began conducting joint military exercises with the United States and France. Simultaneously, Azerbaijan, sensing Russia's weakness, has behaved with newfound assertiveness, detaining Russian troops and minimizing Moscow's influence while cementing its alliance with Turkey. The leader has achieved the astonishing feat of losing influence over two historical rivals at the same time, proving his status as a regional guarantor is finished. This regional decay is amplified by the catastrophic loss of the European energy market, the single greatest source of hard currency and the very foundation of Russia's stability in the 2000s. The leader gambled that Europe would freeze without Russian gas and oil. That gamble failed utterly. Europe rapidly found new suppliers, built new LNG terminals, and reduced its consumption, permanently severing decades of energy dependency. The result is a financial hemorrhage. Gazprom, once a symbol of Russian power, has incurred multi-billion-dollar losses and is now a shell of its former self. The entire European market is irrevocably lost, a monument to a short-sighted foreign policy that prioritized political blackmail over long-term economic prosperity. But the ultimate humiliation is the leader's new relationship with China. Having lost the European market, Russia was forced into the arms of Beijing, a relationship that has devolved into a profound financial servitude. Russia can speak of strategic partnership without limits, but the reality is that Russia is now a junior partner, a mere resource tributary. China dictates the terms of trade, demands massive deep discounts on Russian oil and gas, and insists on payment in its own currency. The Chinese economic giant is extracting Russia's wealth at a rate that is consuming the country's future for cheap energy. This is not a balanced partnership. It is an economic vassalage where the leader, after years of championing national sovereignty, has sacrificed it entirely for short-term survival.
We have meticulously chronicled the external military and geopolitical failures of the Russian state. But the deepest, most corrosive legacy of this long rule is the internal one, a systemic moral rot and the outright destruction of institutions that has led to the disintegration of the Russian Federation itself. The ultimate conclusion of his domestic policy is chaos, fueled by corruption and maintained by fear. The most visible sign of this failure is the catastrophic collapse of law and order, replaced by the capricious will of a single man. The leader's supposed solution to the Chechen conflict was not integration, it was a cynical political transaction that created a rogue state within the Federation. He outsourced the region to a local dictator who operates completely outside of federal law, a system of control maintained by massive continuous federal subsidies. This is not governance, it is political bribery. The Chechen leader and his clan have systematically embezzled hundreds of billions of rubles from the Russian budget through fraudulent state contracts, funding a personal security force, private palaces, and an extravagant lifestyle. This corrupt systemic financial drain, which continues today, is the physical mechanism that accelerates the economic collapse of the entire country. The Federation has devolved into a series of appanage principalities, with the most assertive, Chechnya, living in a state of subsidized armed defiance. Compounding this moral decay is the systematic destruction of the rule of law. The democratic institutions inherited from the 1990s, free press, real elections, and independent judiciary were not reformed, they were annihilated. The leader replaced them with a pervasive machine of repression. Criticism is not tolerated, it is criminalized. The scope of political persecution has become terrifyingly broad, with thousands of citizens facing harsh prison sentences simply for expressing anti-war sentiment, for sharing fake news, or for the slightest perceived criticism of the military. The jailing and exile of critics and the assassination of opposition figures has created a culture of fear, a profound silence that masks the nation's true state of collapse. The most shocking evidence of this moral rot is the direct contamination of the armed forces. The military, struggling with immense casualties, has actively embraced the criminal element, undermining its own legitimacy and combat effectiveness. We have seen the systemic release of convicted murderers like former Special Forces members who were serving lengthy sentences and were then dispatched to the front line to fill the ranks. This reliance on the lowest strata of society, on convicted killers and criminals, proves that the Russian military is prioritizing expendable manpower over basic competence or morality. This degradation is further seen in the barbaric treatment of its own soldiers, with clear evidence of torture and abuse inflicted on drone operators and contract soldiers who are deemed expendable. This internal moral decay is a direct threat to the longevity of the regime, as it alienates the very people it relies on for its survival. The political consequence of this internal chaos is the loss of the country's future. The combination of intense political repression and moral decay has led to an unprecedented exodus of the educated middle class and a catastrophic collapse of the birth rate. The war and the political climate are destroying the country's human capital. The system is consuming its own future for the sake of one man's personal power. The legacy of this rule is clear. A country that had a golden opportunity for prosperity has been deliberately steered toward ruin, its institutions destroyed, its wealth plundered, and its morality sacrificed for the illusion of control. The internal disintegration is a clear sign that the system is structurally incapable of survival.
The true measure of a leader's time in power is not the length of his reign, but the legacy he leaves behind. As we mark the 73rd birthday of the man who has commanded Russia for a quarter century, the verdict of history is not one of greatness or stability. It is a chronicle of profound and systemic catastrophe. He received a nation with an abundance of natural wealth and an educated populace, yet he leaves behind a state that is economically crippled, politically isolated, and morally bankrupt. The promise of a strong, modern Russia was sacrificed entirely for the longevity of one man's personal, authoritarian rule. The first great betrayal was economic. He was handed a generational opportunity during the oil boom of the early 2000s, a chance to invest Russia's massive wealth into technology, infrastructure, and a sustainable, diversified economy. Instead, he made the catastrophic choice to build a rigid, corrupt vertical of power. That wealth was squandered, funneled into private offshore accounts, and used to secure the loyalty of his inner circle. The result is plain to see. Real incomes have stagnated, and the war has accelerated the economy into a state of stagflation, consuming the nation's human capital. The economy is now a war machine running on fumes, a dysfunctional system structurally incapable of providing long-term prosperity. This economic self-destruction is intrinsically linked to the military catastrophe. The Russian army that invaded Ukraine was exposed as a paper tiger, a facade of strength built on propaganda and obsolete Soviet hardware. The cost of this delusion has been staggering, with total casualties, killed and wounded, now nearing 1 million personnel, a human price that is unparalleled since the Second World War. This immense expenditure of life has yielded no strategic victory, failing to capture Kiev, Odessa, or achieve any decisive operational breakthrough. The professional army was burned through, and the subsequent reliance on older tanks and ill-equipped conscripts ensures that the war remains a self-exhausting, unsustainable failure. The geopolitical consequences are equally devastating. The leader's foreign policy has been an utter failure, defined by the loss of allies and the gain of enemies. His aggression directly caused the expansion of NATO, a monumental strategic blunder that brought two historically neutral nations, Finland and Sweden, into the alliance, doubling NATO's border with Russia. He has lost all reliable influence over neighboring states like Armenia and Azerbaijan, proving his security guarantees are worthless. His ultimate humiliation, however, is the economic vassal status to China. After forfeiting the crucial European energy market, Russia was forced into a dependent relationship, selling its resources at deep discounts and trading its sovereignty for short-term survival. Internally, the moral rot of the system is complete. The democratic institutions were not reformed, they were annihilated,